You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Colonel Rob Maness. He's a 32-year U.S. Air Force combat vet. We're going to talk about his work in, the military and outside of the military. He hosts the Rob Maness Show. So we're going to talk about, again, his work and military stuff and non-military stuff. So welcome, Colonel. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background. Like what got you interested in the military and what made you stay so long? And then we'll talk about your current work.
Yeah, that's way back in the Wayback Machine. Well, I grew up as a military kid. My dad was an enlisted man in the Air Force, and he and my mom are from Western Tennessee, and I think he enlisted first in the Army Guard when he was 16, dropped out of high school, and I had three brothers. Three brothers, so there's four of us. I'm number 3 out of 4, so one of us was bound to enlist and stay for a long time. My oldest brother enlisted in the Air Force initially, but then he got out. He just retired from the Army National Guard a couple of years ago, and I was the one that enlisted when I was 17 and then stayed for almost 32 and a half years.
What's the average career length? I mean, I'm sure it changes over time, but I'm betting that yours was a lot longer than most.
Yeah, to hit retirement eligibility, it's 20 years. So most people get out at 20 years, and then there's a percentage of people that are getting promoted. They're still getting good assignments and all that go on to the 26-year point. Although a few of us are crazy enough to stay to 30, and now you can stay past 30. Don Rumsfeld, when he was Secretary of Defense under Bush 1 or Bush 2, changed the rules so you could stay till 40 years as an officer. And so I ended up at around 32.5 or 6, up to almost 32.
What was your most memorable or personally favorite thing that you did in the military that you can talk about? Was it rhythm or?
Well, yeah, it was all just awesome. I mean, my first job in the Air Force was bomb disposal technician, and just the training for that. The U.S. Navy runs the school. The actual term for it is explosive ordnance disposal. We use EOD as shorthand for that. And but just the training for that, there are all kinds of specialized tools. You have to learn all the chemical backgrounds of explosives, known explosives. You essentially learn how to make your own explosives and all the elements associated with that. You become a metallurgic engineer, expert, physics. And that's not even the part that gets you into the military bombs and mortars and artillery rounds, the conventional stuff. And then there's a chemical warfare side to it and biological warfare side to it. And then there's a whole section where you spend months learning every design of every known nuclear weapon. And about all I could say about that is, for the American ones, the scientists that designed that particular bomb or missile warhead are the ones that they do a video of them that teaches you how it was designed, how it was put together, and then how to take it apart and how it works and everything. And from the actual men that did it. So you still have a lot of time in classrooms listening to very boring sounding people talking about very interesting things. And then there's another section which is really even more interesting than that, and that is the improvised explosive device training, which is what most people, when they hear the term EOD or bomb disposal in the military, they think about the IEDs, improvised explosive devices that we faced, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan.
That's amazing. That is really, really interesting.
To this day, I rose up through the enlisted ranks to become a staff sergeant. It's E5, so it's like the second non-commissioned officer rank in the Air Force. I was a sergeant and a staff sergeant. So I had full responsibility for a team. Nobody ever questioned me, and I was only like 21 years old. So to this day, I think that's still probably the best job that I ever had. But I got to do some amazing things. I later went to officer training and jet navigator training, flying training, and became a jet navigator on air refueling aircraft. The first jets that we built were called the KC-135A. You still hear about KC-135s because we re-engined them and put electronics on them and all that, kept flying, and they're still flying today. But the ones I flew on were the original models, I was born in 1961, and most of those airplanes, they started building them in 56 and went up through 63 or so, maybe some in 64 and 65. So they were built all around. But that's a fascinating mission too, because in those days, the navigator position did hand navigator logs, just like Christopher Columbus did on the ships that they sailed across, keeping navigator logs, and use the sun and the moon and the stars, doing celestial navigation, except you're on a jet that's doing 450 knots across the ocean. So, and it was all done by hand using a special sextant. It was amazing. Jet aircraft. That was another fascinating thing. How we became increasingly more computerized as GPS came online and better navigation computers came online and those kind of things. But we still, even the advanced aircraft, like the B-2 bomber, which I haven't flown in, but the advanced aircraft like the B-2 bomber, it doesn't have a navigator position in it. They took the last bomber, U.S. bomber that had navigators in it was in the B-1 bomber. After I was in tankers. But that airplane still uses what's called a star tracker system, because you can't just rely solely on GPS, because, the enemy tries to jam it to all kinds of things. You have to have really precise navigation. So we still use the planets and the moon and the sun and the stars to navigate. It's just some highly advanced systems.
Yeah, it must be weird to be in the pinnacle of technology and then using methods that people have used for thousands of years at the same time.
Yeah. When I trained as a navigator, you weren't allowed to even use an electronic calculator. It was all hand calculations using old time, what they were called sight reduction tables, and for the celestial stuff. And even when you were using electronic equipment like a radar to take a navigation fix off of instead of the stars and stuff, you still had to do it by hand. You weren't allowed to use any kind of calculator because, the bottom line is the electronics fail all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably heard the phrase, just remember all that government stuff that we buy for the military, it's all built by the lowest bidder. That's a hard lesson learned for some people. So anyway, I flew in tankers and got selected to go fly in the backseat of B-1 bombers, and most of my flying times in B-1 bombers. And the coolest job in the flying world that I had was as a squadron commander and director of operations, which the DO and Air Force squadrons are the second in command, other than the squadron commanders at command. So we had 14 B-1s and 88 crew members, about 270 maintenance personnel and life support and admin folks. And I was in that squadron for a total of 30 months. That was the best officer job I think I ever had. Although I had some great jobs after that. Got to go to the Navy War College, got to go to Harvard for a year to the Kennedy School to get a master's. And eventually, after Navy War College, left the B-1 flying and went to an airborne intelligence business at Offutt Air Force Base. There's an organization there called the 55th Wing. That's where it's headquarters, but we had units all around the world, in the Pacific, the desert, in Europe, out in Arizona, people deployed down South Central America. We had a squadron of folks deployed in that unit for flying intelligence aircraft from the beginning of Desert Shield. You remember that, the first Gulf War? Yeah. The 6 months prior to that, starting in August, before the war actually happened. So the intelligence platforms, the squadron deployed there, and the unit I was in 2007 and to 9 had that squadron airplanes there rotating people and jets in and out since Desert Shield started, continuously through everything, peace, war, whatever. And as far as I know, they're still there. So that's a fascinating business, airborne intelligence, and we got to play in some very fascinating things that I can't really get any more specific about.
Oh, word.
It's a very interesting unit. Look up the 55th Wing. There's all kinds of highly sensitive classified missions and platforms that the wing uses all around the world to provide the intelligence that we provide. It's really good, and it goes into the intelligence collecting agencies and those kind of things, and it gets exploited and becomes intelligent product. you see on the other side sometimes. I also got to be the wing commander at Kirtland Air Force Base, which is a fifth or sixth largest Air Force Base in the world. We had 53,000 acres, several mountain ranges, 100 different missions from various things. At Sandia National Labs, one of the three national laboratories was hosted. We hosted them on my base there, and just all very, very interesting stuff going on there. And the other assignment I had that was very interesting was the Pentagon. Before I became a squadron commander and after Air Commander Staff College, I went to the Pentagon and worked in the Joint Chiefs of Staff area in a division called the Nuclear Operations Division. The J-38 is what its J code was. And we did things like maintain the what's called the Nuclear Football Black Book. The Black Book, the real name of it's called the Nuclear Decision Handbook. It has all of the menu options for the president, the military aides that carry the bag around called the football.
Well, hopefully it doesn't have a software upgrade, randomly, and you don't know, man, if it changes it like Zoom.
Well, just like training in air navigation is, pencil and paper and slide rule, circular slide rules in our case, the air calculator called the MB4. We do things very particularly in the Black Book world to ensure that technology can't interfere with it, and technology interaction is minimized as much as possible. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
somebody described it as, so you're talking about basically a Waffle House. Then once people were trying to figure out how the book works,
It's funny.
So what was it? Was your life the military was it a very disciplined life? Was it just kind of like, I don't know, to be under that level of discipline for so many years, how did it affect you think? Or did you just not notice it? It was just life.
Well, my dad raised us, and he was an NCO. He was a senior NCO before he retired. So we grew up in a very disciplined household, and we had to be. Look, his last assignment was in North Africa, in Morocco, in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was the only overseas assignment. He took us with him. And there were 2 attempts to initiate civil war by Islamists on the monarchy twice in those few short years that we were there. So we had to be very disciplined. I'll never forget the first time that it happened. We actually lived in a house downtown. We weren't living anywhere near a military base, and they didn't have American military bases there anyway. My dad was in Israel, the American Air Force, and wore civilian clothes most of the time. And he worked on a Moroccan Air Force base. But anyway, the first time it happened, my mom and dad were at a party on the base, which was about 30 miles from downtown where we lived in Kenitra. And my brothers and I think my youngest brother was about 6 then, so I would have been 10 or 11. And it was night when the phone rang, and our mom was on the phone saying, "Hey, don't go outside. There are RV trucks and tanks and people running around with guns and everything. We're going to send, the base is going to send a truck to pick you guys up and bring you into the base." And about 6 hours later, just before dawn, it showed up. And what come to find out, it was Islamists that tried to assassinate the king of Morocco. And they did it through the army. They had infiltrated the army. So we had to be very disciplined when mom or dad said, "Hey, you need to do X, Y, or Z." We were pretty clearly and well trained by that point. Even my 6-year-old little brother managed to keep himself under control. And then it happened again a year later. But this time it was the Air Force that had infiltrated. My dad was advising for us. So, and by that time we were living on that Air Force base, and the Army came and surrounded the base. And they came on the base and started arresting Moroccan Air Force people and everything. So anyway, it's a very interesting and disciplined life growing up. So I was used to that by the time I enlisted myself. And the jobs that I've been in, as you can imagine, are highly trained and highly disciplined when you're doing those kind of jobs. So I guess I just got used to it.
What's it like working with, regular civilians that aren't as disciplined? Do you butt heads a lot? Was it difficult to transition?
No, in my case, I was very fortunate because that last job I had as the commander at Kirtland Air Force Base, a large part of my force was actually government civilians. And as a commander, you deal with like government union employees and those kind of things. So I've been doing that for many years. I'd worked in the Pentagon, which is mostly civilian employees, and for the most part, though, on the government side, a lot of them are prior military, so they're a little bit easier to get along with, but not all of them are. And you have to get used to that. And in my case, I was very fortunate. I got hired when I left the Air Force by a Fortune 500 utility company called Entergy Corporation. I was hired as the utility operations safety and training director for, what a lineman is that goes out and works on put your wires back together after the storms and all that. Well, that's who I was the director of safety and training for, over about 4,500 of those guys spread across 5 states, I think it was, with 5 training centers, those kind of things. So the utility companies are structured very organizationally, very similar to a military command structure. So I was very fortunate there. But the people themselves, most of them had not been in the military. So I was comfortable in the organizational structure, but I had a lot to learn working with folks that had not been in the military.
I would think that people that have been in the military a long time, it might be scary for them to come out because maybe they feel like, how am I going to work on things that feel important? What if I just go back to this normal life and, I feel not useful and not important because I'm not dealing with life and death situations? I mean, was there any of that hesitancy or fear with you, or how did you feel when you finally came out?
Well, in my case, the intensity level really didn't change that much because of the job that I went into, doing safety and training. Look, one of the things I did was do hurricane recovery. I was living on the shore of New Orleans, basically the North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain. My office was in New Orleans. So when a hurricane hit, part of my job was to become what's called the system safety and recovery officer for hurricanes. So, I was immediately thrown into intense operations there, getting linemen deployed into the zone, making sure they're fed, very similar things to what a military commander does for his forces when they're, or for his or her forces when they're going into battle and those kind of things. So in my case, it was not that big of a transition, but that is true for a lot of folks. Because you're, especially if you're like a 1 or 2 termer and in the global war on terror up until the Afghanistan withdrawal, a lot of those folks had been deployed, especially in the heat of it when I was still deploying in combat. There were, some of the Army troops were going on 15-month deployments, then a 1-year deployment 6 months after that. So they were, very active and intense, and then they would get out, and that lack of intensity causes problems for some folks. Not everybody, but some folks. And that's one of the challenges there. When you're dealing with things like PTSD, I think that's one of the reasons why the suicide rates are pretty high, very high on veterans side. But, even the year I left the Air Force, 2011, the Army had 360 active duty suicides of young enlisted and young officers that year. And that was on active duty. And when I retired, I learned that veterans were committing suicide at a rate of about 22 a day. And you've heard that phrase before. That's true. Matter of fact, most people think it's higher because of lack of reporting, and not every veteran is taken care of by the VA, those kind of things. So it's hard to get these accurate data. And that's significantly higher than the civilian population. And part of it is that you lose that lack of intensity, the sense of mission, the sense of brother and sisterhood that get by training hard together and going out risking your lives together many, many times. And then all of a sudden, you get out and it's like the lid's taken off of the pressure cooker and you don't know what to do with yourself. So some of us, like me, we throw ourselves back into the work, and others aren't able to do that sometimes.
So right now you're doing the Rob Maness Show. What's that about, and what's your current work about?
Well, about 2 years after I got out and had been working for Entergy, I lost my mind and decided to run for the U.S. Senate, Louisiana, against a guy named Bill Cassidy, who's one of the 2 senators that's in today, and Mary Landrieu. And we lost that race, but we built a big following, raised a lot of money. And one of the things I did after that was got recruited to start this little television show that we have here. I think we're on episode number 549 or 50 or so now. It hasn't always been an every day of the week show live like it is today, and has been for over a year. It was once a week for many years. But anyway, the reason why we started that was we saw that the mainstream media was failing the American people. And it still is, as you probably are aware. You do this stuff too. The mainstream media doesn't report the truth. They don't report facts that the American people have a right to know. As a matter of fact, they're more of a government propaganda outlet now, or a propaganda outlet for large corporations that pay their money to them. Even the hard news, so-called hard news parts of their outlets are like that. And that's one of the reasons why after that political race, and once I entered the political arena, that's one of the things I wanted to do was get into the media And we started robmaness.com. And we took my campaign website and turned it into a conservative news website in mid-March of 2020. And then the show itself, and about a year and a half ago, got picked up by a little network called Worldview Tube that's run by the same guy that built Lindell TV for Mike Lindell, and ran it for 3 years. Owns this network. His name is Brandon House out of Memphis, Tennessee. And after I've been with him a couple of shows, he goes, "Hey, you want to do live every day?" And I said, "Well, let me see if I can figure out how to do it." And I called a couple of friends of mine that had been mentoring me in this business, and I just asked one of them. I said, "Tell me how I would do this on a daily basis." And my friend started laughing. He goes, "Oh, Rob, you going to take that on?" He goes, "Well, here's how you do it." And he gave me a little model to follow, and I called Brandon back. I said, "Okay, I have a structure now, and I think I can work. Let's give it a try." We've been doing it that way ever since. We don't just do national security discussions, but I do devote at least one day a week to war policy and the current wars that are going on, because the American people don't get the truth from the mainstream media or from their elected officials about it. So I try to bring experts and guests on that know the facts on the ground that the mainstream media and the government doesn't want to talk. So I do that. And unfortunately, I can't change the theme on that day. It's on Mondays, More War Mondays. And when I started that theme, I said, "Well, I hope we don't have to do this forever. And maybe we'll be able to call it, something else." But unfortunately, it just keeps getting worse. And then, we talk about cultural stuff, political beyond just national security.
Do you talk to militaries of other nations? Are you allowed to, with permission, to speak to people like, that are in the SAS or something in Australia in UBA or different places?
I have a few. A lot of them are involved in their own, but I have a few, and I can do that. All of us in that space but have a military or intelligence background, try to take great care in the specifics of what we talk about. But yeah, absolutely. I would love to interview more. As a matter of fact, folks from overseas, especially anybody that's been in the war zones on the ground, in Ukraine, that kind of stuff. I have a guy that comes on regularly. He's actually a former Air Force Special Ops helicopter pilot, Air Force Academy pilot. He'll be on this coming Monday again too, to talk about Ukraine, because he started a media business that's much bigger than my little show and website. And he actually has reporters on the ground in Ukraine, and he did a lot of special ops work there when he was in the Air Force on the ground in Ukraine. So he's very familiar with the Eastern European viewpoint and how their militaries work or don't work. So he's got people on the ground. So I bring him on whenever I'm going to do a show on Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine's blowing up again. Over
Are there certain topics that you have to get permission to post?
I never asked permission.
I just don't know how much the government monitors or says, like, hey, that's a sensitive topic. No one must report on it except our approved people,
I wouldn't listen to them anyway. This is the United States of America.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I went into this business, is because of what you just said. The government, if there's classified information, it's going to get somebody hurt or killed, and I'm aware of it, I will not, give specific details on things. But also what I talk about is all open source anyway, and I've been out since 2011 now, and my security clearance lapsed in 2015. I purposely did not renew it because I didn't want to get into that. And there's plenty of information out there that's not reported by the mainstream media or the government for us to work with.
So what's a friend of mine once said that conflicts and the outcomes of them and the winners, he thinks that's always a lot closer than both sides would let on, meaning there's few like truly decisive victories. Is there anything in general you could say about the conflicts that you've reported on or seen with, these on the ground eyes that people just don't understand, don't know, or misinformed about, or just misconceptions just because they're not in it? Like, what do you see that maybe that's surprised or, people don't know?
It's two biggest events. Let's talk about it from an event perspective, or the Ukraine-Russia war, and then U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. Just from those two perspectives, and just talk about it around the events in the Ukraine. For the Ukraine thing, we'll get to that in a second. But on the Afghanistan thing, my last combat deployment. I was a squadron commander. We finished up in mid-2005, and when we got there in December of 2004, my deputy and I, are in briefs, with the Air Operations Center folks that give us what's called our air tasking order, which is what we plan our combat missions and around and those kind of things. When we asked, well, what's the current strategy? The individual chuckled and said, well, our strategy is to send you to a kill box, and you wait till you get a call from the troops on the ground with the troops in contacts with, they're taking enemy fire. And then you drop bombs where they ask you, on targets that you drop bombs on, and that's pretty much the extent. That's not a strategy, obviously. This was in mid-2005. And by the end of that deployment, every commander gets to outbrief with the boss of the Air Operations Center, which is Air Force 2-star. And my deputy and I went in to outbrief with him before we left. And I just was frank with him. I said, look, sir, we have no strategy. And we've defeated the Taliban and Al Qaeda, which was what our intent was after 9/11. That when we responded, and I was in the Pentagon on 9/11, so I got to work the response and then go fly it as a commander in 2005. And I said, look, we won. Give this country back to its people is what my recommendation is. Of course, they didn't do that. The choice was made just, I think, about a year later to go into this nation building, create Afghanistan in America's image, those same stupid things that we did in Vietnam, tried to do in Iraq, all of that. And then here we are in 2021 when it fell. So my point with all that is you were told by the generals, we just need a little more. We just need a little more. We're on the march to victory. We just need a little more time. In this case, it wasn't more as in more troops, more aircraft. Like in Vietnam, it got attention because they wanted to have, 500,000 more troops and et cetera. You didn't get those big numbers. It was about time. Well, we just need more time and tweak our strategy a little bit, but we're winning. They kept saying this, but we're winning, but you never win in those wars. And that's what the public, that's why most people were probably surprised at the withdrawal debacle from Afghanistan and probably thought those people trying to fly on those airplanes by hanging onto the wheels that fell off of them at 500 feet and died were fake. And they weren't, unfortunately, because in war, both sides put their propaganda spin on it. And since that information lives in a classified shell, the truth is very difficult for the public to see, the ground truth, you know what I mean? It's not that people necessarily are lying outright, but they're putting their spin on it. That's why we call it propaganda. So both sides are doing that. Even the American side was doing that. And unfortunately, they were also propagandizing our own people and the decision makers and the government, the generals were in the end. And essentially,
who is in control? I mean, you have the media, which seems to be, at least partially controlled by, like you said, big corporate advertisers and the government. And then you have the politicians, then you have the military. Either the politicians listen to the military, does the media just do whatever it wants and no one yanks its chain? Like what?
Oh no, the corporate media is very tightly controlled, especially by the Pentagon outlets. They all have their national security report. They're the one that comes to mind of people that watch Fox News is Jennifer Griffin. She is a Pentagon talking points reporter. She's not a journalist. And so it's very tightly controlled. And if any of those people get out of line, they lose their credentials and those kind of things. So that's how they control it. And the so-called reporters like Griffin have a tendency to say, yeah, I'll report that exactly how you want to instead of asking questions and that kind of stuff. And that's where the failure is right there. So it's very tightly controlled. That's why they don't like us. They don't like us independent types. You know what? That's why we exist, because of them. And we exist because this incident, this event at the end of Afghanistan, where most Americans were shocked. What do you mean the Taliban has won? For all those years, they were being told that we were winning. So to get back to your original question, that's one of the events that I see. Of course, those of us on the inside, I saw that coming in 2005 when I left my last combat deployment and gave my boss the debrief, But once you're out of it, and you don't have access to the classified information and everything on what's going on, it's and you're still on active duty, you're bound by the rules to protect classified, or you resign, but you still are bound by rules, by the law, to protect classified. If you don't can't just go release it and those kind of things. So, it's very difficult for the American people or any population whose kids are at war to get the truth until it's over. And even then, as you alluded to in your question, it's difficult to tell. And I'll just talk very briefly about the Ukraine war. This one really saddens me more than anything else, because the United States intelligence world was heavily involved in the creation of Ukraine as it is today, and pulling it towards NATO. And our poor decisions, really what you're seeing is results of our poor decision making from always starting in before 2010, when we did what's called color revolutions a couple of times in Ukraine to get the people we wanted in, and the West wanted in, to do that. And NATO's part of this too, unfortunately. The NATO countries are too. And our poor decisions led to Russia making its poor decision to initiate this last part of this conflict. But this conflict's been going on for a long time, much longer.
It seems like Ukraine has been the playground, dumping ground, the experimental ground for the U.S. and a lot of countries. It's just, has been used to provocate Russia, and nudge them and poke them. And
every time I hear an American politician say something like, this unprovoked war of aggression by Russia, well, that's just a lie. That's a lie. Our actions did provoke Russia. Russia's got a 1,000-year history of protecting that part of the land to keep as a buffer between it and Western Europe, because the leaders of Western Europe have consistently tried to invade Russia and take over, long before the Soviet Union ever existed. Hitler, Napoleon, just keep going back and back. Anyway, so that's an issue here too. But here's the real sad part. The real sad part is the fatality and casualty numbers. And you gotta look in the window when the young Air National Guard intel airmen released the slides. You remember when they released the casualty number slides, the classified? You remember that story? You got to look into the reality right there, because the Russian numbers were very low, and the Ukrainian numbers were through the roof as far as deaths and injuries on those numbers. If you remember that. And I had known that even before those slides were released. I was just through observation and what the governments were saying and NATO was saying and Ukrainians were saying, and then hearing and talking to people that were coming out of the country and those kind of things, and the stories weren't adding up. So that's the really sad part, is the Ukrainian population, especially young men, has been chewed up in this meat grinder, but they had no hope of winning. They had no hope of winning their territory back or anything. The best they could do at this point is get to a stopping point and then sue for peace on the Ukrainian side. And then this whole thing, and this is something that's scary, is that the current president, is agreeing with the numbers that he's been being shown that shows the Russians' numbers are high too. And honestly, the Russian numbers aren't as high as what he's being told, in my opinion. Because you know what? If they were, you would see lots of angry moms and dads in Russia that would be hurt, because it's not like the old Soviet Union where they're inside the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain and have everything completely sealed off from the outside. With the advent of social media, you can't keep that stuff tamped down. Not in that country, anyway.
What about in like North Korea? Are there any places that are truly like hermit kingdoms where it is a total blackout of info?
Yeah, North Korea, China's still pretty good at it, but there's a lot of leakage that comes out of China too. You know, back in the day, we would never have known about the Uyghur situation that they've been putting in concentration camps, using for forced organ removal and selling their organs in transplant systems. We would never have known about that to the extent that we know about it now, where it's fact. We know that it's fact. Back in the day, you know, during the Cold War, we wouldn't have known about that because the technology didn't exist to get the story out. But today it does. Even North Korea has great difficulty, and its success in that is born mainly on its small border and the way the geography is laid out. You know, so anyway, it's two events. Get back to your question about people not really knowing what's going on, who's in control. I think are the two biggest, in my experience, examples of that. And you're right. I mean, it's absolutely correct. It's very difficult to know what the truth is. It's very difficult to know who's in control. Quite often, these generals, they think they're in control, but they don't. And Afghanistan's a prime example of that. I believe that most of the generals thought that they still were in control of some sort, all the way up to the bitter end. And obviously the Taliban controlled the entire country.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to be silly or anything, but with all you see, does any one group of people or country control like literally the world, or is it just too big of a chessboard, too complicated, too interconnected for any one group, whoever they may be, to really run things?
It's too vast, way too vast. No, there's no one group that's running things. There are many groups with power centers that would like for you to believe that one group is running things. And there are many groups with power centers that actually have active influence operations that try to get certain segments of the population to believe things that aren't true. And those operations are ongoing. Like the Chinese Communist Party, they declared a people's war on the United States years ago, and they use what's called unrestricted warfare, and it does everything, all kinds of warfare except for kinetic war at this point, because they'd rather win without blowing things up and killing people with bombs and bullets, because they want the territory and they want the infrastructure, and they're very good at that. But and they spend a lot of time trying to influence Americans to believe things that just aren't true. And the main thing is to try to divide us against each other. Marxist tactics and strategy.
Yeah, online, I've heard there's bot forums, there's groups of people that are commenting, and like, how much of the talk and chatter online do you think is not genuine, is from some group trying to push propaganda or an agenda? Is it most of it or some of it, or what do you think?
I think it's about 80%.
Wow.
I think it's about 80%. Because you have government entities and non-government entities, corporate entities that are in that mix, and they all have vast amounts of dollar resources to pay people to do it. And as the technology, like artificial intelligence, increases, the capability to do that becomes greater and greater and greater. And if you look at platforms like X, formerly Twitter, that's probably the main one now. The AI-driven bot population has been increasing recently, and that's one of the challenges that Musk faced when he first came in, was to get rid of the digital bots. But now you've got these AI-created bots. Eventually, the AI piece will get to where it creates it on its own, just following general guidance or objectives and everything. And it'll be very difficult, for platform engineers to control at some point. That's one of the dangers of AI that we need to really get a handle on and figure it out. But yeah, look, the question you asked is very much related to my view on things like climate change. I haven't been an aviator. I've flown around this world in this atmosphere, I don't know how many times or how many millions of miles, but I had been part of the working human machinery in the atmosphere itself. And I'm here to tell you that scientifically, there's no way that human activity can have the influence on climate that these so-called scientists that have made this stuff up say that it can have. It just doesn't work that way. The system, the climate system on this planet is too vast. It's too complex. Like the oceans have ways of cleaning themselves that human beings aren't even beginning to fully understand at this point. Now, are there some things that we should do better? Yeah, like littering, plastic, and plastic bottles and that kind of stuff. Absolutely, we should. But from my perspective, there's no way that human activity can influence even the weather systems. There's a lot of talk right now about cloud seeding. Now, we've been trying to do cloud seeding for farmers since at least the 1950s, and that's not a secret. Somebody was out there yesterday saying, hey, these are all highly classified programs. It's been going back to the 1950s. Now, there may be some classified programs. I've never seen one. I flew on government airplanes for 25 years, all types of them. Never seen one. It could exist in a very small way, but it's not in a way that's going to have any massive effect. However, that doesn't mean that it's not been tried. And the reason I bring that up is that it's been in the news a lot recently, and some pretty big name influencers are talking about it a lot. Does cloud seeding exist? Absolutely, it exists. Can it work? Yes, it can work. But can it work in in the massive quantities to do things like put the trillions of gallons of water into central Texas that just happened? No, it can't. We don't have that level of technology or that level of capability to do it that well. A few million gallons, yeah, but not the trillions of gallons that put down. Can it steer hurricanes? That experiment's been tried, but it was never been operationalized because it couldn't get it done, couldn't get the job done, and those kind of things. So I'm a big believer in getting the facts out that we know, and if there is something out there and we uncover it, we'll get it out there. But so to get back to the climate itself and the atmosphere, it's the same thing with the way the world works. There's those that say a certain group controls the entire world. It's extremely difficult to do. I've lived all over the world. My friends and family, you probably traveled, right? I mean, you see about it. I'll never forget the first time I was alone as a jet navigator without an instructor or anything. I was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean doing celestial navigation at night in bad weather, and I'm between Hawaii and Guam. And when you're out there at 30,000 feet and you experience that vastness, and if it ever crossed my mind to go, wow, we really are able to impact this, I would just chuckle to myself because it's just incredibly not possible at this point. It's like those that say that the population's too great for the planet. Well, our population's been dropping. What do you mean? Our birth rates are dropping. So none of the theories that are out there really hold water because I've experienced the vastness of this planet and the systems that it uses to take care of itself. Pretty amazing.
Well, what do you do when rationality seems to be slipping away and there's more and more hysteria? And, the people I know, I've heard, especially during COVID, you hear them just repeat word for word things that are said in the media. And what do you do in an environment where it seems to be degrading into just emotional hysteria and not rational thought on all sides?
Yeah. Well, what I do personally is try to find the courage to stand up and speak the truth, no matter how bad the response is. And I think we owe the people that did that in COVID, especially early on, that figured it out, a great debt of gratitude for that. Because and that's the other thing is I tell people that, especially folks that they go say things like, well, that's a conspiracy theory. And I go, yeah, it may be a conspiracy theory right now, but the reason why I exist in the media world that I exist in is because I'm willing to talk about those kind of things from a factual perspective and an experience, a direct experience perspective, and just tell people, look, this is what I know. Is this possible? Sure, it's possible. But you don't have enough information yet to know whether it's, the theory is good or if it's just another conspiracy theory. And I try not to use the term conspiracy theory because the people with power have made that term up, including Central Intelligence Agency, the KGB, in order to use that as pejorative to discredit folks, like during the COVID. It's that, early on when the smart people were starting to figure it out and talk about it, they were labeled as conspiracy theorists. That goes back all the way to at least the 1950s with the CIA and using that term and developing it to use as a discrediting tool for anybody that speaks out in disagreement with whatever they're doing or whatever they're trying to protect. The bottom line is we all have to find it in ourselves to stand up and try to speak the truth from a facts perspective, but still tell people, hey, I've got an open mind. Like I tell people about the weather modification, I say, look, I've got an open mind. If I ever see evidence that convinces me that this capability that you're talking about actually exists or is being tried, I'll tell you. That's
I guess, like I asked you before, there's no one group that runs the world, but if you can say what are some of the most powerful groups that, if anyone in the aggregate of them do kind of run things?
Well, I will tell you the groups that try to run. How's that? Because they fail every day. They fail much more than we lay people out here that aren't inside the power structure realize, quite frankly. What do we call it? The liberal world order that the United States and the West built post World War II. That one, World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the United Nations, that blob, as some people call it, the intelligence agencies that go with it, the armed forces that go with it, that whole blob there likes to think that it can run the world. But all you got to do is look at Ukraine and you can see the dramatic failures of all that, especially on the national security side and the propaganda side and those kind of things. So they want you to think that they can run the world, but they really can't. Now, can they control specific parts of it or for specific periods of time for specific purposes? Absolutely. But you can see that the World Economic Forum and all of that structure it's cracked. The World Health Organization, all of that structure is cracked. It is cracking and is being dismantled internally and externally as we speak by people like you and me, just activists. And, I know a lot of them. And will it take a long time? Yes. Is there a guarantee of success? No. But that structure that a few years ago, a lot of people would think was all powerful, it has no power almost whatsoever nowadays. As a matter of fact, a lot of people they're so discredited that normies, as I call them, just sit out here and laugh at them because they think they're exercising power, but they're really not, because we don't believe them in it. We don't buy it.
Well, that's good.
It's the same thing. This whole Epstein thing that's going on right now. You're watching a United States central government set out on a influence operation, try to convince the American people that it's all over. There's nothing to see here, right? Poll 10 of your normie neighbors and ask them if they believe what the government's putting out, or if they believe what they know. Because most people know the facts that are knowable now about this guy. Even the part where Alex Acosta, who was the prosecutor down in Florida, that became a Trump appointee in the first Trump administration, they even know that he said under oath that he was told to lay off of Epstein because he's an intelligence asset. So most normies look at it and go, no, we're not going to believe you. As a matter of fact, we're not only not going to believe you, we're going to keep talking about it until you put the facts out. And that's all people really want, is the facts. But that's an example of the lack of power that these people that run, in this case, the central government of the United States, think that they are powerful enough to overcome that. Unfortunately, they can't now, because they're so discredited.
No, that's good. I'm glad. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of the alternate channels, they talk about ground news. I don't know. I don't know if you ever use them, or if there any remedy for, or any way to find really what's going on. Like it is a question. So for the average person, with all the propaganda and all the BS from the news, how can they find out what's going on? Listen to your show. What else can they do?
Yeah, you can listen to my show. You can find it at robmaness.com, is where we post all the stuff. You can follow me on X at Rob Maness. That's where the most recent information that I put out, or that I share from other outlets that I trust. And that's one of the things that we owe Musk a debt of gratitude, we being, the regular people that have no power from a government perspective or a corporate perspective. We owe him a debt of gratitude because he's opened up that platform to where at least you can find sources on there that can be trusted at some point. So if people follow me and they see me sharing information from a reporting source, not necessarily an opinion thing, but a reporting source, like some of these independent reporters that go out on the ground to some of these incidents, then that's what I did, is I built my trusted network. And then what I will do is I will take what I learn during the day, because I do this for a living now. So I'm watching the X platform all the time, and following my people and reporting myself. So I will take what I learned, and I'll run one of the mainstream shows in the evening to see what they're talking about, just as a measure of effectiveness of what I know versus what they want me to know. And they fail every night. They fail every night now, because there's enough people that are honest, that are actually out here doing reporting on the ground, and especially inside the country, for the real facts to get out, which is great. Unfortunately, not everybody knows that. How many people do you know are aware that there was a direct assault by at least 10 Antifa members in a trained, professionally resourced assault team on an ICE facility over the last 4 days?
Sure, I didn't know about that at all.
Very few know about that incident, or the incident within that same period where a guy armed with an AR-15 tried to assassinate ICE agents. Or yesterday when the ICE guys were raiding the marijuana farm, that one of the activists shot at an ICE with a firearm. Don't even know.
Who funds groups like Antifa or things like that? Or they just, I don't know, just it doesn't seem spontaneous that people would be this organized and have weaponry and things like that. Who creates these groups and funds them?
Not spontaneous. That's another thing that we owe Elon Musk for. USAID, the USAID information. Let's talk about how George Soros worked, the Soros organization. A lot of people think that that Soros just put his billions into these non-government organizations that do this stuff like train Antifa, et cetera, bail them out of jail, or help them organize, get them resourced and those kind of things. But that's not what was really happening. Musk uncovered through USAID that there's an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy that's supervised by a guy named Bill Kristol. You'll recognize that. But it has two organizations underneath it. One's a Democrat organization and one's a Republican organization. And these organizations are chaired by senior senators, and they have on their boards of directors, senators, congresspeople from the parties. And tax dollars funnel into those organizations, and tax dollars funnel out of those organizations. And guess where George Soros gets a lot of the money? The Soros organization gets a lot of the money that it uses to help fund these NGOs that do things like resource and train Antifa and those kind of things. Comes out of that Democrat side of that organization and that NGO under the National Endowment for Democracy. That's one of the things that's been uncovered by that effort, that Elon Musk. So your tax dollars, that's where they're getting their money through these non-government organizations and through these, personalities like Soros and his organization.
I guess I don't mean to ask you about everything, but I'm curious, what do you think happened and why did Doge stop? Did it just meet too much resistance, or was it used as a fainting blow to get other things done, or what do you think was the purpose of it?
Well, unfortunately, the Republican Party apparatus that is in power in Washington, D.C., that's part of what a lot of people call the Uniparty. So what I just described, the USAID NGOs, the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, and the National Democratic Institute NGOs, that is Uniparty structure. So there is no, some people say the Republicans are what's called controlled opposition. There actually is no controlled opposition. It's all the Uniparty structure that's trying to conserve its power and protect its power. And it uses the vast bureaucracy that we've allowed to be created over the last 100 years in central federal government as a tool to be able to do that. And what you witnessed happen was Musk coming in all excited. The president was excited for him. You saw these amazing findings happen, right, and get documented. But then what happened when he got to the Department of Defense? What happened when he got to the Department of Defense? There was less than $90 million worth of fraud, waste, and abuse in the Department of Defense. Now, that budget's $1 trillion. Do you think there's only $90 million of fraud, waste, and abuse in a $1 trillion budget? I don't think so.
Yeah, not even close.
And what that is, the reason I point that out is that's the indicator. Because what's really going on is the politicians that are in office, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are being controlled by the money sources that they get to finance their campaigns that keep them into power. And they're getting controlled by, in the DOD's case and the intelligence agency's case, by the prime contractor companies that funnel money to them. And if they get told by somebody in the Department of Defense, hey, you need to this, if you don't support this, we're going to run a candidate against you and stop funding you, then they do what they're told. That's what's really going on. So when all of this came out and it got documented in the media, the pressure was put on to the politicians in Congress, especially because that's who controls the purse strings and the legislation that has to be passed eventually, like these rescission bills that have to be passed. And they were told, hey, you're going to minimize this. And if you don't, then we're going to come after you and remove you from power. And I think they've even gotten to the president. That's where, and this is just Rob's educated guess, but that's where the friction between Musk and President Trump came from. And Musk decided he was going to leave.
Probably the same thing with Epstein. My guess is that there's enough high-level people in the U.S. and probably maybe in other countries too that are on that list that if it came out, the scandal would be so big that the largest powers that be pulled the strings and said, make it go away. That's it.
That's what they're trying to do, but they won't be able to do. And I think the real reason is that it's a combined, in military operations, we use a term called joint or combined. The joint operation is like when the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army do an operation to get together in the same country services. A combined operation is where allied organizations from the allies are all working together. And I think that the Epstein operation is a combined intelligence operation. That's why you see people like Prince Andrew involved in that list and those kind of things. So people from other countries whose name have been revealed momentarily and then covered back up. And you're right. I think there are so many high level people involved in it, not just in government, but in corporations and everything, that whoever has decided to make the call and say, we're going to cover the, we're going to try to make this go away, has done that. And I think that's why you're seeing, words come out of the president's mouth that people never thought they would hear.
Yeah.
And because it's about an intelligence.
Well, very good, Rob. I mean, you've had a great conversation, I think, going in all kinds of directions. What's the best place for people to hear more from you? Go to the Rob Maness Show, or where can they go?
Yeah, the Rob Maness Show is it's live Monday through Thursday from 3 p.m. Eastern to 4 p.m. Eastern. We do a simulcast to an X audio space during the show, 30 minutes before the show, during the show, and then I try to stay on for 30 minutes after the show on the space. And you can both watch it and listen to it on X or Getter or Facebook or True Social. Also on the new True Social Plus broadcasting, live TV broadcasting. Our show's broadcast on there. It's been up in the top frame a few times since they started on that and everything. But the X is the easiest place, at ROBMANESS. And if you'll follow me on that, and you can see who I share for reliable information. Maybe you will choose to follow them too.
Okay, great. Well, Rob, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's been a great talk, and take care for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.